Bednock. Now, GBNews can exclusively reveal that the Conservatives are planning for a second vote on a national grooming gang inquiry. GBNews' national reporter Charlie Peters, the man who's done so much to bring this important story to national attention, sat down with the Tory leader Kemi Badenoch earlier today, and he joins me now. Charlie, a big moment.
Yes, and several announcements coming forward here. 4 amendments that we understand. We're going into the crime bill with regards to grooming gangs. First and foremost, it's that top line, the second push for a national public inquiry vote. Also, they're going to ask for the mandated publishing of ethnicity data of grooming gang perpetrators. Thirdly, they also want to make it a case that grooming is an aggravating factor for sentencing for all perpetrators, not just ringleaders. And there was a fourth one in the interview we heard today, which we weren't expecting, that the Tories will also put forward an amendment to remove human rights protections around grooming gang perpetrators, so they can't claim the right to family life in order to evade deportation, as has happened in several occasions. Now, earlier today, Kemi Badenoch met with some survivors and campaigners from Oldham before I sat down with her for this interview. Kemi Badenoch, what did Oldham survivors and campaigners tell you today?
They talked about their sense of betrayal, that the people who should have looked after them and their children did not. But they also talked about wanting justice served. And that's the thing that brings us all together right now, that we know there has been a lot of investigation, but it has not been anywhere near the scale required in order to get to the root of what's been happening across our country. And that's why we have not let this issue of a national inquiry go. We are still pushing for Labour to start a national inquiry. And today we're going to be putting some amendments down in the crime bill so that we can have another vote, which they can't obscure like they did previously, have another vote so that MPs and Parliament can vote on ensuring that we get full justice for all of those victims of the rape gang scandal.
Now, you've already had this vote in January. It was rejected heavily by the government and its MPs. Why do you think this time will be any different? And are you concerned that the exact same result will happen? So
the last time we put our amendment in the schools bill, and the Prime Minister told his MPs that if they didn't help him out, that the schools bill would fall. So a lot of them used that as an excuse, saying they were doing it so that they could have breakfast clubs or something else. Now we're putting it in the crime bill. And we're putting it as an amendment that doesn't take the whole bill out. It's something very specific on this. And the amendments go beyond having a national inquiry. We're going to have an amendment on publishing ethnicity data. We're going to have another amendment to stop people using the fact that they have children or a family as an excuse to not be deported or to not go to prison. We want more than one amendment so that we can get the full scale of public accountability and justice for the victims.
On that last point, that amendment to stop people who have a family using the right to family life to avoid deportation, that's human rights legislation. How are you going to carve out a section from that without overriding the ECHR, for example?
The ECHR has power in our country because it is applied through the Human Rights Act, which is domestic legislation. And this is one of the things that I've said many times, that people use lots of excuses to avoid doing what they need to do. We've had the same thing with the Sentencing Council, where it was trying to put different people into different categories to get sentences based on their ethnicity or leniency based on ethnicity and sex and so on. And the government was saying that nothing could be done, but actually if you put pressure, things can be done. And that's what we're doing as the opposition party. We are putting pressure on the government to do the right thing.
There are some famous cases of grooming gang perpetrators who haven't been deported, particularly in Rochdale, very near to Oldham, where you met those survivors today. Do you get embarrassed when you think about the previous Conservative government's record on failing to deport those perpetrators, some of whom took hundreds of thousands of pounds in legal aid to avoid deportation? Is that a shameful part of the Conservative record?
One of the things that we need to make sure is that people get justice. I have said that the party is under new leadership and we should deport all foreign criminals, irrespective of what crimes they carried out. There are many reasons that could be given about why it didn't happen. Some people were deported, not everybody. Some people had clever lawyers. Some people found loopholes. They used the rights to, of having a family to block it. So every day, every year, we did things to improve the situation. We're not there yet. In our last year, we found 450 perpetrators from that task force. There's always more to be done. And what we're saying is let's keep doing more to make sure that people get justice.
Yesterday, the barrister appointed by the government to set up the 5 local inquiries that Home Secretary announced in January said he had to text a Home Office official, "Do you still want me?" because he said not enough progress had been made, not enough communication had been launched with him. What was your reaction when you heard that?
I wasn't surprised because I don't believe the government wanted to do anything, and that's why I'm not letting it go. And when I spoke to the victims just now, one of the things that they said was that there are no other places announced. It's still just Oldham. Where are the other places? Let's get something that covers all of the towns where we found evidence that this scandal occurred. This is a national scandal. They've said that they're going to have a handful that they'll look at, and yet it's still not statutory, so they can't compel witnesses. And as we can see, they're already going slow. It's been 3 months now. It's time for the government to put its money where its mouth is and actually start delivering for the people who need justice.
It's been 3 months, but some people in these areas blighted by these gangs might say, well, it's been 14 years and 3 months. Is there a sense now that the Conservatives are turning a corner on this, or do you have a lot of trust building to go through to convince those communities that the Conservatives really do mean business on this scandal?
It's been far more than 14 years. It's been multiple decades. And in those 14 years, we had some inquiries. We had the child sexual abuse inquiry. It didn't go far enough. We did more. We had a task force. It didn't go far enough. So I'm not going to sit here and act like absolutely nothing was done. I am saying that more needs to be done. Labour government should pick up where we left off and do more, not run away and hide. A lot of the councils that are impacted are Labour-run councils. What are they doing about it? That's what I'm here to talk about. And yes, this is about building trust with the public. I have said that our party made some mistakes when it was in government. If it didn't, we'd still be in government. But that doesn't mean that we're just going to do nothing. We have to keep going. We have to do the job of opposition. That's what my job is now. And it does involve rebuilding trust with the public. But people won't trust you from talking. It's what you do that counts. And that's why we're doing the job of opposition, putting down amendments, forcing a vote. And as one of the victims said to me, every single Labour MP who votes against those amendments should not be able to look themselves in the mirror, and they should be ashamed because they know that they're doing the wrong thing.
One of those amendments you're putting forward, as you've mentioned, the publishing of ethnicity data. Now, a lot of police forces in the country just haven't collected that data when it comes to grooming gang perpetrators. How would you like to see police officers and forces and chiefs that don't do that held to account? Would you like to see some serious sort of ramifications for those involved in that?
Well, once it's law, then they will have to start collecting this data. We've had this problem of lack of data collection in many other areas. I remember during COVID, the ethnicity data wasn't collected, which meant that a lot of conspiracy theories and rumors about who was being impacted and why were getting out there. Collecting data means people can see the truth. It's very important. It's not just in the interests of victims, it's also in the interests of the police forces themselves.
Just one final question. You've obviously said last time we had this interview that those involved in this sort of abuse were peasants. There's also been this discussion that the government is going to look into the cultural and religious and ethnicity factors involved in this sort of abuse. Do you have confidence that they'll look into this honestly, or do you think there should be a cross-party approach as part of that inquiry?
I don't think that this is a party political issue. I do think some parties are more scared of it than others. And we're not scared, and we're going to keep fighting for the people who deserve justice.
Why do you think Labour are scared of those cultural or ethnicity factors?
That's a question you're going to have to ask them.
Okay. No view on that? Is it going to be a voter issue?
I don't know. It's a question you're going to have to ask them.
Okay. Kane Badenoch, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, an important interview there with our GB News national reporter Charlie Peters and, of course, Kemi Badenoch. Now, Charlie, what's the government's position on this?
Well, the government in January, they rejected that call for a national statutory inquiry, but they launched 5 local inquiries, putting aside £5 million to do so. They announced that Oldham would be one of those areas. The debate that kind of restarted in January was sparked by a GB News exclusive revealing that Oldham had a request for a government inquiry rejected. The government have also said that they've launched this rapid review being led by Baroness Louise Casey to look at, as I just mentioned in that interview, the cultural factors that could be linked to this sort of child abuse. That was expected to come back in April, but they've said it's well underway. We're not sure when that's going to happen. We have reached out to the Home Office this evening and not heard a response before broadcast, but they have consistently said that the government takes child sexual exploitation very seriously, and they will be looking into those local inquiries. Yesterday, Tom Crowther KC, the barrister who's been appointed to create a framework and assess that, and also to chair the Oldham inquiry, which has been described by Labour as a victim-centred inquiry, which really gets results in their perspective. Tom Crowther said that local inquiries can be more effective than statutory inquiries because, he says, they're not having people being cross-examined by lawyers and judges. Instead, people can come in his words, sit down with tea and biscuits and just share information. But critics of the government, including the Conservatives and others, say that it's the only way to get accountability is by compelling people to give testimony and also to give evidence.
And this review by Louise Casey seems to me they're dragging their feet. I mean, we're told 3 months in January. That's middle of this month, isn't it? But they're delaying on getting that going?
Yeah, and we're seeking an update on when that might be published. Still searching for that information. The terms of reference only was published about 8 weeks after it was announced. So there's clearly been a delay there, but no further information on where that might come. But from Kemi Badenoch there, summarising those 4 amendments. We thought there might be 3, but 4 amendments that they're going to push into the crime bill. First and foremost, that national statutory inquiry. Also, the publishing of ethnicity data to be mandated. Grooming to be an aggravated factor in sentencing. And finally, one that came as a surprise during the interview, Kemi Badenoch saying that the Tories will push new legislation to remove human rights protection for grooming gang perpetrators so they can't use the right to family life to avoid deportation. But of course, as I raised in the interview just there, several times under the Conservatives, people successfully used that legislation to avoid deportation, costing the taxpayer hundreds of thousands of pounds. Now, Kemi Badenoch made those announcements with GB News after meeting with a group of survivors and campaigners, and we spoke with Lucia Ray after her meeting with Kemi Badenoch, a local campaigner from Oldham, to ask her what she thought of the meeting. So, Lucia, how was your meeting today with the Leader of Opposition?
We was very pleased to hear that she's wanting to continue the fight and hold the government to account on this matter. Delighted to hear that they're going to be putting this vote forward for a statutory national inquiry because, as I said in the meeting, I see this as our national integrity is at stake. We need authorities to be held to account. It is no use with no statutory powers. It brings no justice to victims, to survivors. That will help police with their investigations if it's got statutory powers. We have nothing to fall back on. It's a one-time opportunity, this now, and we've got to get it right. The world's watching us, and we just believe that national and statutory is the way forward. We don't want another Hillsborough case on our hands where it's going on for years and the families are put through torture. And you only have to compare inquiries that have had statutory powers and ones that haven't and see the difference in getting to the truth much faster, and that's what's needed. We need to show the world how we handle child sexual exploitation in this country, and we don't stand for it.
You've been campaigning on this issue for years now. How does it feel to have so much attention finally turning to the so-called grooming gang scandal?
It's been helpful that the spotlight shined on it. It's been awful for Oldham because the authorities there are under so much attack for negligence, for not cooperating, so that has made survivors highly stressful, their families too. It's it become a very toxic place. It's on social media, it's become a breeding ground for it's just awful for everybody, and it needs sorting out. Someone needs to lead from the front now and get this sorted out, and let's just hope that then Labour ministers can put their hands up and vote the right way when this vote comes along.